before the championships, before the 6 finals MVPs, before the shoes became a billion-dollar empire, before millions of people around the world called him the greatest basketball player of all time, there was a teenage boy in Wilmington, North Carolina, who had just been told he wasn't ready. Michael Jordan didn't make his high school varsity basketball team as a sophomore. He was sent to junior varsity. To most people, it was just a disappointing moment in high school. But to Michael Jordan, it became personal. He didn't know it yet, but that moment would become one of the most important chapters of his life. Because some people hear rejection and walk away, others hear it and decide they'll become impossible to reject. Michael Jordan chose the second path. But here's the part of the story people often forget. Jordan didn't become Michael Jordan because everything went his way. He became Michael Jordan because almost nothing important came easily. He lost, he failed, he was embarrassed, he faced better teams, he experienced devastating loss, and every time life gave him a reason to stop, he found another reason to continue. This is not simply the story of a basketball player. It's the story of a boy who turned rejection into obsession, obsession into discipline, and discipline into greatness. This is the story of Michael Jordan, the kid who wasn't good enough, then became the GOAT. Long before the NBA, Michael Jordan was just one of several children growing up in a competitive family. His father, James, valued discipline and hard work. His mother, Dolores, demanded responsibility. And Michael had an older brother named Larry. Larry was athletic, and Michael wanted to beat him. The driveway became their first arena. No cameras, no crowds, no commentators, just 2 brothers competing. And Michael learnt something that would follow him for the rest of his life. He hated losing, not just on a basketball court. Losing bothered him deeply. Being beaten bothered him. Being overlooked bothered him. And eventually, that competitive fire would become one of the defining characteristics of his career. But there was something Michael still had to learn. Talent can open a door. It cannot keep you inside. At Emsley A. Laney High School, Michael wanted to play varsity basketball, but during his sophomore year, he didn't make the varsity roster. He played junior varsity instead. The story would later become legendary. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. But the reality is more nuanced. He was a young sophomore competing for a varsity place against older players. Still, Michael felt the disappointment, and he remembered it. Rather than treating that moment as a verdict on his future, he treated it as a challenge. He practiced, he developed his game, he became stronger, he improved, and eventually he made the varsity team. Then something changed. People started noticing him. The teenager who had once been overlooked was becoming one of the most exciting young players in the country. College scouts came, offers arrived, and Michael Jordan eventually chose the University of North Carolina. But the greatest chapter of his life hadn't even started. At North Carolina, Jordan played under legendary coach Dean Smith. He was talented, but he was still learning. He wasn't handed greatness. He had to develop it. Then came the 1982 NCAA championship game. North Carolina faced Georgetown. The game was tight, the pressure was enormous, and with seconds remaining, the ball found Michael Jordan. A freshman, he rose, he shot, and the ball went in. North Carolina won the championship. Suddenly, the teenager from Wilmington wasn't just another promising player. The country knew his name, but Jordan had tasted something. Not fame, not money, winning, and he wanted more. In 1984, the Chicago Bulls selected Michael Jordan with the 3rd pick in the NBA draft. The league was about to discover something special. Jordan could fly, he could attack the basket, he could score from almost anywhere, he could defend, and he played with an intensity that seemed almost impossible to contain. He won Rookie of the Year, he became an all-star. He became one of the most exciting players in basketball. But there was one problem. The Chicago Bulls weren't winning championships. And Michael Jordan didn't enter the NBA to become famous. He entered to win. Then Jordan met the Boston Celtics. They were experienced, physical, champions, and they were not afraid of him. In the 1986 playoffs, Jordan produced one of the greatest scoring performances in NBA playoff history, 63 points against Boston. But the Bulls still lost. That's the cruel part of sports. You can be brilliant and still lose. You can score 63 and still go home. Jordan had discovered a lesson that individual talent couldn't solve. If he wanted championships, he needed more than spectacular performances. He needed a team. He needed leadership. He needed to become more complete. And then came another obstacle. Detroit. The Detroit Pistons were physical, disciplined, and relentless. They developed a defensive strategy designed to make Jordan work for everything. Every drive hurt. Every possession became a battle. Jordan kept losing. The Bulls kept falling short, and for years, Detroit stood between Jordan and the NBA Finals. Jordan could have complained. He could have blamed his teammates. He could have demanded an easier path. Instead, he got stronger. He changed his body. He improved his defense. He improved his passing. He learned to trust his teammates. He learned how to lead. The kid who once wanted to prove he was good enough was becoming something more dangerous. A complete player, a leader, and eventually the Pistons couldn't stop him. Neither the Chicago Bulls reached the NBA Finals. Standing across from them were Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers. For Jordan, this was the moment. Years of losing, years of criticism, years of coming up short. All of it had led here. The Bulls won. Michael Jordan was an NBA champion, and when Jordan finally held the trophy, he cried. Not because the pressure was gone, but because he knew what it had taken to get there. The kid who had once been overlooked was now standing at the top of basketball, but Jordan wasn't finished. Another championship. Jordan was becoming the face of global basketball. Then came 1993. Another championship. 3 titles in a row. 3 finals MVPs. The world seemed to belong to Michael Jordan, but sometimes the biggest victories are followed by the deepest pain. Michael Jordan's father, James, was murdered in 1993. For Jordan, this wasn't just another headline. His father had been one of the most important people in his life. The man who had taught him discipline. The man who had supported him. The man he trusted. Now he was gone. Jordan stepped away from basketball. He pursued professional baseball. For a while, the greatest basketball player on earth wasn't playing basketball. People wondered, was Michael Jordan finished? Had the legend disappeared? They didn't know. Jordan didn't know either. But eventually, he came back. March 1995, the world received 2 words, "I'm back." Jordan returned to the NBA. But returning wasn't enough. The Bulls were eliminated from the playoffs that year. Jordan had something to prove again, so he went back to work. And the following season, the world witnessed something extraordinary. The 1995-96 Chicago Bulls won 72 games and lost only 10 during the regular season. Jordan won the MVP. He won the All-Star Game MVP. And then came the finals. The Bulls defeated the Seattle Supersonics. Jordan was a champion again. But this time, the championship meant something different. He had returned from retirement. He had returned from personal tragedy. And he had returned to the top. Yet the story still wasn't over. Another championship. Then came 1998. Jordan was older. The pressure was enormous. The Bulls faced the Utah Jazz. Game 6, the final seconds. Chicago needed 1 basket. Jordan had the ball. He dribbled. He watched the defense. He created space. He rose, and he shot. The ball went through the basket. The Chicago Bulls were champions, again. 6 championships, 6 finals MVP awards, and Jordan walked away from the Bulls. The image became immortal. A champion, a winner, a legend. But the most important part of the story had nothing to do with the final shot. It started years earlier, with a boy who wasn't selected for varsity. It's easy to look at Michael Jordan now and imagine that greatness was inevitable. It wasn't. That's the illusion created by history. We see the 6 championships. We see the highlights. We see the trophies. We see the shoes. We see the iconic photographs, and we assume the ending was always guaranteed. It wasn't. Jordan had to become the person capable of reaching that ending. He had to develop. He had to lose. He had to adapt. He had to deal with pressure. He had to experience grief. He had to return after leaving. He had to prove himself again and again. And that may be the real reason his story still matters. Because Michael Jordan wasn't simply gifted. He was relentless. People can debate who the greatest basketball player of all time is. They always will. LeBron, Jordan, Kareem, Magic, Russell, others. Statistics can be compared, championships can be counted, records can be measured, but greatness is more complicated than numbers. Jordan's influence went beyond basketball. His shoes became a global cultural phenomenon. His image became synonymous with excellence. His competitiveness became part of his identity. And his story became a lesson repeated by generations. You don't have to start as the best. You have to keep becoming better. Go back to that teenager, the one who didn't make varsity. He couldn't see the future. He didn't know he'd become a champion. He didn't know he'd become a global icon. He didn't know his name would eventually become a synonym for greatness. He only knew one thing: he wanted to get better. And that's the part of Michael Jordan's story that matters most. Not the sneakers, not the commercials, not the fame, not even the championships, the work. Because before Michael Jordan became the GOAT, he had to become Michael Jordan. One practice at a time, one failure at a time, one loss at a time, one comeback at a time. Maybe the greatest lesson isn't, you have to be the best. It's, you don't have to be the best yet. There is a difference. Someone can be ahead of you today. Someone can have more talent, more experience, more money, more opportunities. Someone can overlook you. Someone can tell you that you're not ready. And maybe they're right. Today. But today is not forever. Michael Jordan's story is proof that your current position is not necessarily your final destination. The person who gets rejected can improve. The person who loses can learn. The person who fails can return. The person nobody notices can become impossible to ignore. Michael, before the world knew your name, there was a boy who wanted to prove himself. A boy who hated losing. A boy who felt the sting of being overlooked. You could have allowed that moment to define you. Instead, you used it. You turned rejection into discipline. You turned failure into motivation. You turned pressure into performance. And eventually, you turned a dream into a legacy. That's why your story isn't really about basketball. It's about what happens when someone refuses to let an early chapter determine the ending. You weren't born holding 6 championship trophies. You weren't born knowing how to lead. You weren't born knowing how to handle fame, pressure, failure, and loss. You became that person. And maybe that's why millions of people still look at your story and see something of themselves. Because everyone knows what it feels like to be overlooked. Everyone knows what it feels like to lose. Everyone knows what it feels like to wonder, am I good enough? Your answer wasn't a speech. It was your life. You kept working. You kept returning. You kept competing. And eventually, the world had to change its opinion. The kid who wasn't good enough became the man everyone wanted to stop. The player who was once overlooked became a champion. And the name that began in a small North Carolina gym became a name recognized around the world. Michael Jordan, the boy who wasn't good enough, then became the GOAT. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. Don't let someone else's opinion of you become the limit of your own potential. Because sometimes the person they overlook today is the legend they'll remember forever. If this story meant something to you, like this video and subscribe to Letters to Legends. Because behind every legend, there was once a person who had to fight through something. And sometimes, the greatest stories begin before anyone believes in you.